Hey guys, welcome to the texturing demonstration for this course. We're going to be unwrapping the fire hydrant with a UV map, and then we're going to be bringing it into Photoshop to texture it up. And in between, I'm going to go ahead and get the rest of the scene prepared so that you guys can kind of skip past that and don't have to sit through watching me texture the whole thing. But we're just going to focus on the fire hydrant here since that's what the focus of the course has been on. So what I did was I went into Blender and I created a new image and assigned it a UV grid in the image editor. Then I just went ahead and started marking seams, as you can see what's happening now. It's pretty monotonous, so that's why I decided not to show you guys the rest of the process for all the other objects. Once you've done it once, it's the same thing just over and over again. So go ahead and kind of describe what's going on as it happens. One of the things I wanted to mention is that you should always keep in mind how you are going to texture an object is going to change depending on how it's used in the scene. So sometimes you don't even need to UV map something if you're not going to apply something really custom to it. A lot of background objects or things like walls and floors tend to use repeating textures, especially in architectural scenes. So the only reason you'd really need to go in and UV map those is if you're going to do some custom bump mapping, custom dirt or things like that in the color map. And even then, you don't always need the UV map. So anytime you can avoid it, I would, because UV mapping by hand is really, it's kind of becoming a little bit antiquated in the way that 3D works. Now that you can paint directly onto the models in the 3D scene. We haven't really covered that in this course, but in the future, in some other courses, I'll go over some of the more advanced texturing techniques that you can do in Blender. And with the advancements in the texturing technology and the speed in the 3D viewport, you can actually take a model, assign it UVs automatically, and then just paint directly onto the surface of the model in the viewport. And that really speeds things up because you don't have to worry about overlapping seams and things like that. So it's kind of a nice way to work rather than having to go in here and try to get all the edges to line up in the UV map. So if you are UV mapping an object, be aware your main objective has to be a clean unwrap that reduces stretching in your painted textures, and that's the overall goal. And the second kind of goal of what you're trying to accomplish with a UV map is a coherent layout in the map itself, so that you can make the painting process easier when you go into Photoshop or your image editor of choice. Primarily, of course, like stretching is a big issue. You want to get an evenly applied texture all over it, so what you paint is what you see in the final render. But if you have a really complicated UV map layout, then it's going to get really confusing when you take it into another program to try to modify it, because you're not going to remember where certain edges line up. It may even be hard to see based on the map itself, what object you're working with, because as you'll see with the included files, I've actually combined a lot of objects onto a single UV map, even if they're not using the same textures, because it saves on the need to handle multiple files, which is really good. And it also allows you to kind of save on memory when you're rendering, because if you only have to import 2 or 3 images versus one for every single object you're texturing, then it's going to save you render time in the end, because you're going to be using less processing power. So I don't know if you guys saw it when I did the arm for the fire hydrant. A lot of the objects on this hydrant itself are actually just duplicates that are scaled around and moved. So the bolts and the arms for the sides are actually just the same object. So once I textured one of them, what I did was I separated that off of the rest of the model, and then I duplicated that and moved it into position on top of the one that was sitting there on the other side, and I deleted the original one because it keeps the UVs. So if you do have some repetitive objects that are part of a single object, or you're texturing something, it's kind of counterintuitive to be texturing the same sort of thing over and over again. So to save time, once you've textured something that is a duplicate in the scene, go ahead and copy it over and then put it in the same position, and you can keep all the textures and the UVs where they are without having to redo it. It's quite a big time saver, especially in this model. So getting close to kind of finishing up the seaming of all of this UV for the fire hydrant itself. As you can see, I'm just constantly going through, unwrapping, checking to make sure that everything's the same size, things like that, rearranging things on the UV grid to kind of keep everything kind of organized in some sort of fashion. A couple of things I wanted to be going over are some of the commands I'm using in the UV editor that we didn't cover. A couple of things that I'm doing are, of course, the mark seams option you guys are aware of, but two other options are the average island scale option and the pack islands command, and those are both found in the UV menu inside the UV image editor. And so average island scale tries to proportionally scale the selected UVs in relation to one another so that the same relative size texturing units can be used, and it kind of keeps your grid even all over the entire model. This is kind of important when you're texturing and you're using textures that are relatively the same size in terms of how you took the texture information itself. If you're clone stamping stuff in an image editor onto an object, you're going to want to make sure that everything's kind of the same scale, so that'll help you there. Pack islands is a command that will take all the separate UV islands you have selected, and then it'll rearrange them automatically in the UV space so that you can export them to your painting software. So average island scale and pack islands are two options that'll really help you kind of speed things up if you're trying to automatically unwrap UVs. So that's about it for the unwrapping. As you can see, if I've gone past that now, and I'm sort of into testing out a very basic texture on the unwrap. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and assigned kind of a red shader to the fire hydrant model, and in order to test the UV map, of course, we need to use something that's going to be placed on the actual surface of the shader itself. So we're going to go ahead and add a clouds texture in a minute that will kind of simulate some dirt for us on the surface of that fire hydrant. And right now I'm just kind of testing out some environmental ambient lighting in the scene to see if we can get some nice even lighting over the fire hydrant. And making sure I go in and grab the rest of those chain objects for the hydrant, because they weren't connected, so they needed to be kind of joined together, and also assign that red paint texture. These, by the way, were not UV mapped because they didn't really need to be. They were so small and kind of non-involved in the scene that you're not really going to see anything that's on them. So I went ahead and just kept a regular red paint shader without any kind of external image editing on these. But as you can kind of see now, I'm trying to get that cloud texture in there to simulate some of that dirt. So playing around with some of the influence with the mirror settings, the specular intensity, and the color, trying to kind of get the dirt to get in there, because as things get dirty, the dirt covers up the base material, and you wouldn't have something that's dirty on the part that it's dirty reflecting light like it would on the rest of the material. So you kind of have to keep that in mind when you're layering things onto objects. So we're getting pretty close to the end of this demo for this part of the lesson, and in the next part we're going to be jumping into Photoshop, and I'm going to kind of show you how I paint this fire hydrant up. And again, we're not going to do that for the rest of the objects, but for the fire hydrant, I'm going to kind of show how I might weather it a little bit, add some more photorealistic textures to it. And so that's going to be about it for this one. We'll zoom in and kind of show you guys a little bit about the spots where we made it dirty. You guys get a better look at that. And in the next part, we'll jump into Photoshop and get this thing textured. Hey guys, really quickly before we jump in and start texturing this this fire hydrant in Photoshop, I wanted to show you something that I did use that's a bit more of an advanced feature for texturing, but I thought you guys might find it useful, especially if you get into doing normal maps for games or things like that. It's called texture baking. So let me kind of explain what it is and how it works. So I've got the fire hydrant here. If I go into edit mode and I've got all the vertices selected, you can see the UVs up here, just like we finished unwrapping. And by default, you know, we had this grid behind here to kind of preview what that would look like on the model. What I'm going to do is hit this X to get rid of that. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new image to put behind here. We'll just call it something, and then like AO, and then put a size here for the image that we want to do. You can do anything you want. I'll just leave it default here, and then just hit OK, and it'll put this image behind the UVs in the UV image editor. And so now that this is the active image for this model, what we can do is go down here under the render settings and go down to the very bottom under this bake menu. And basically what this does is it allows you to take information from within the scene and bake it permanently into a map if you have something that's UV unwrapped in your scene. So let me kind of explain why this would be useful. If you have lights or bump mapping or things like that for a game that you want to create from something that's already done within the scene, in the case of bump mapping, if you had a really high-res object and you wanted to incorporate those bump maps automatically from Blender into your map without having to paint them, you could bake that. If you're doing the same thing with normals, if you guys are familiar with what normals are, it's sort of a more advanced bump mapping. You can do that here as well. But there's all these options in this drop-down menu. You can bake shadows into your textures. You can bake the textures themselves if you've painted something onto an object, or just you like a procedural texture that you've made. You can bake those permanently into a UV map automatically. Lighting, anything you need, alpha, mirror, colors, specular, intensity, things like that. In the case of this model, I like to start with something called ambient occlusion that we've talked a little bit about in the world settings here. If you turn this on and then you were to render this, we went a little bit over what this would do, but if you set your settings the way you like it and then test render it in the scene, you can actually turn that back off so that it doesn't render, but your settings are safe the way they're set up here, and your gather options are set up down here. I up the samples to 64 down here, as you can see, to get a much higher resolution ambient occlusion render. And what I'm going to do now, instead of rendering it in the scene, I'm going to go down here since we've assigned this, and I'm going to select ambient occlusion from this drop down under bake mode. And then I'm going to make sure I check normalized, which is actually going to take, instead of the color information from the lighting in the scene and the textures on the object, it's going to just do a black and white image for me. And it's basically going to bake that ambient occlusion shadowing effect into the texture map for me. And the reason I like to start off with this is because it gives me kind of a nice self-shadowed image to start off with that describes the forms of where things are located on the UV map instead of just having to rely on this wireframe. So if I have these settings applied here, I basically just have to check normalized and turn on ambient occlusion. If I then hit bake, it's going to go ahead and start building this map as it renders. And then once I'm done, I can go to image and then save and save it on the hard drive. And I already did this, so this is kind of what it looks like. It did take quite a while. It took more than an hour to render this out. But basically, as you can see, it kind of gives me a nice little black and white sort of image of where things are, what's located. And what's great about this is I can take this into Photoshop and use it as a basis for the texture map, because if I turn this ambient occlusion onto a multiply layer, it will allow me to put a color underneath, and it'll automatically add self-shadowing into the color map, which I can then dial in with the layer opacity. So we'll go over that a little bit in the next few minutes, but I just wanted to kind of go over how baking worked so you guys could be aware of kind of the shortcut I used to start this color map. And so without further ado, let's get into the texturing painting of the fire hydrant.